皆さんお疲れ様です。ナルミです。今日はジェイコブさんに来ていただいてます。
Hello again.
ありがとうございます。This is the third time that we filming this. 今日はですね、Ask ジェイコブさんということで、ジェイコブさんに皆さんが抱いている英語学習に対する質問に答えてもらいたいと思います。お願いします。You have a degree in English?
Whoa.
That's
I
right.
have a Bachelor's of Arts in English with a concentration in applied linguistics. So I studied English grammar, I studied English history. In college, I'm not an expert, but I do have a degree in those things. Yes.
Okay.
So I'm like barely qualified to talk about it.
Cats, the stormy is ということで、ジェイコブさんに出てもらうイギリス英語の方がアメリカ英語よりも上品である。
I think, yeah, generally, most people probably think that way. I think Americans think that way too.
あ、そうなんだ。
Yeah, I think most Americans would say that. Yeah. If you were to ask why, it's all about sort of like vocal quality and the quality of sounds in general in phonetics, right? So we've just sort of evolved over time to equate certain vocal characteristics to, you know, something like the concept of elegance, you know, which can be cadence, it can be inflection, it can be really anything, right? So it doesn't have anything to do with, by the way, you know, economics, actual class difference. It has absolutely nothing to do with that. It has absolutely nothing to do with British people being better than American people.
What is phonics?
Phonetics? A method of teaching people to read by correlating sounds with letters or groups in an alphabetic writing system.
Is it important to learn it? To speak English?
My knowledge is limited, okay? I do have a degree, but again, like I don't study this type of stuff daily. So, huge disclaimer there. But I would say my answer to this question is that, you know, it's more hito sorezore, I think.
Okay.
Like the way that you learn a language and become good at it is really individual. And I think a lot of evidence tends to really suggest that that's the case as well, especially in sociolinguistics studies. I would say yes. I mean, like, for some people it would help, but some people it doesn't. You know, so if you're in a class and they're teaching it, I would say respect that and pay attention to it and actually try to learn it, because it could help. But there's a chance that it couldn't, and if it doesn't, then I would say you don't really have to pay too much attention to it. Someone who's trying to learn English should more or less, or any language really, build off of their strengths instead of focusing on like one specific thing at a certain time.
Okay.
There's plenty of people who excel at phonics and phonetics in general. And those people probably pronounce the language very well. But that doesn't mean that they're necessarily very good at speaking and grammar.
I'll ask you a question. I have two actually. So one is, did you learn it in school? English
No. Nobody learns how to phonetically pronounce their language, their native language. That doesn't exist.
Then the second question is that, let's say you meet somebody who pronounces things really well, but grammar is terrible. And you meet another person can not really pronounce well, but the grammar is perfect. Which one do you think like able to understand better for you personally?
I think like somebody who has a mastery of grammar in a certain language probably has gotten to the point where their pronunciation is already at a certain level of comprehensibility.
Right.
Therefore, I would say that, and this is just me personally, I would probably say that the person who excels in grammar but has pronunciation deficiencies is easier to understand. If you're only giving those two options.
Yeah. The reason why I ask you the question is because Japanese people think that pronunciation is everything. Some people actually say that that's important to learn grammar.
Oh God. Look, I actually wrote essays about learning grammar. And I can basically explain to you a little bit of my argument about why I am such an advocate, you know, and vehement supporter of learning grammar. Because grammar is an all-encompassing aspect of a language. When you learn grammar, you don't actually just learn grammar and syntax. Syntax being sort of like the order in which a sentence occurs and whatnot. When you learn grammar, you simultaneously learn vocabulary, you simultaneously learn pronunciation, you also learn sociolinguistic skills as well. Grammar is completely all-encompassing. You even learn a little bit of just how dialogue works in general. What we would call locution, fancy word for just talking. If you learn grammar, you're learning everything. You're learning everything about the language. I became conversationally fluent in Japanese, which is considered a very difficult language, in 2 years by pretty much focusing most of my study time on grammar. Now, again, huge disclaimer, this is not going to work for every person.
Like を使えば間が埋められますか?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, these are called filler words in linguistics.
Filler words.
Yeah, like the entire purpose of those words in those specific environments are used to fill in pauses.
Okay.
I would definitely say that if you are trying to figure out what to say, but you don't know the word, then using those filler words is a great way to sound more native.
Okay. Is there the time where you should not use those filler words?
Yeah, maybe. Maybe you don't want to use those in a job interview. I could see maybe using words like would be more appropriate than using something like or like. But at the same time, like their English doesn't really have respect classifications like Japanese does. So at the end of the day, even if you do use those words, the difference is very subtle. More just like casual versus formal, but like at the end of the day, filler words I wouldn't even really put them in any category of formality.
My question is, can you make your English sound more formal? And if you can, then how will you do that?
Absolutely yes.
Okay.
But again, it is way less systematic than Japanese.
Right.
In Japanese, in order to do that, you actually can conjugate a verb differently. That doesn't happen in English. In Japanese, you have categories corresponding to certain levels of deference in language, okay? You have keigo, you have kenjougo, you have teinego, and you have tameguchi. We don't have that in English. In order to sound more like you're speaking in keigo or respectful English, it's really more about casual versus formal. And the way that you do this is by, using less filler words, or again, a lot to do with your vocal quality as well, and your sort of inflection in your voice. Also, your vocabulary is very important. So this actually doesn't necessarily mean just using bigger words. It's choosing your vocabulary in a way that you're choosing formal words versus casual words. Okay, what does that mean? Well, it means if you walk into a job interview, you don't look at the person interviewing you and say, "Hey, what's up, man?" That's very disrespectful, and it's informal. So, are you understanding kind of the gist of what I'm saying here?
Yeah, that's
in Japanese,
a better example.
Right, in Japanese, you can say the same exact sentence, but conjugate the verb differently, and it becomes respectful, right?
Right.
So, you can literally say, "dosuru," and change the conjugation of those words to "ikaga saremasu ka?" Dosuru and "ikaga saremasu ka" are categorically they are the exact same words. It's just one of them is like conjugally respectful while the other is not. Okay? That doesn't exist in English. So if you want to say like "what's up, man" to your boss, but you want to make that more formal, you would instead say something like "hello, how are you today?" So "what's up, man" and "hello, how are you today" are not conjugally equivalent whatsoever. Okay, so it's more about the manner of speaking, less about the actual conjugation and vocabulary that you're using.
Do you think you can master English by just listening to somebody speak in English?
So let's see. There is a thing called second language acquisition theory, SLA theory. There is such a thing called comprehensible output versus comprehensible input. Comprehensible output means the words that you're actually saying in a second language are comprehensible. So you actually understand what you're saying when the words come out of your mouth, versus just basically saying a phrase and you think you know what it means, but you don't actually know. Comprehensible input is the other way around, where somebody says something to you and you comprehend exactly what they said, and you can translate it. There have been a lot of studies about sort of which one is more effective and whether or not it's possible in second language acquisition to only have one or the other.
Interesting.
Turns out, as you can probably all imagine, that it's better if you get both. So people have proven in SLA theory, and I studied this in sociolinguistics, that in order to acquire a second language, comprehensible output and input is essentially fundamental. You generally speaking, unless you are a very rare case, cannot just like move to Ireland and surround yourself with Gaelic speaking people and hear it over the course of 15 years and somehow learn the language and become fluent. It's not possible.
Interesting. That's really interesting.
The input has to be comprehensible. That's why we call it comprehensible input. And but also, again, like I said, comprehensible input is not the only way to acquire a second language. It's possible, but very hard. The best way is to have a combination of comprehensible input and comprehensible output, which means that you are both understanding things that people are saying to you in your second language, and you are able to translate it as such, and you are also able to understand the things that are coming out of your own mouth, right? Think about it. Is there somebody you know in real life that has an American husband that lives in Japan with them, and they've been living there for like 26, 54 years, and they can only really say like konnichiwa, sayonara, kore o onegaishimasu? Like,
日本語で訳すとどういう意味ですか？へよ欲しいんです。これでほんまに38年おった。
I guarantee you probably either know someone like that or you have a friend that is like that. That's because you cannot just immerse yourself in a culture and learn the language naturally just from hearing it. It's not possible. It has to be comprehensible input, and you also have to be producing comprehensible output. That's my answer. The extremely short version of what I just said is you have to speak and you have to listen. In order to acquire a second language, you have to do those two things. In order to acquire it, what does acquiring mean? It means actually becoming fluent. Sure, you can kind of understand a language by just listening all the time. Like, people talk about that all the time with like TV shows. But that doesn't actually guarantee fluency. The majority of the time it doesn't. Some people can do that. Those are rare cases. But I'm just talking generally here, okay?
So that, let's say, the reason why I was able to acquire English, that's because I went to school and learned to speak it. Or I went to school and listened to the English. And also, I learned how to speak it. Is it correct?
I would tone it down a little bit.
Okay.
I would leave school out of this. Because when you say that, it makes it sound like you have to go to school in order to learn a language.
Sure.
You don't.
No, I mean, in my
definitely
case.
Definitely not. No. I completely understand what you're saying. What you're saying is technically correct.
Sure.
I'm just saying that the fundamental answer to this question is you acquired English because you had comprehensible input and comprehensible output. That is why you acquired English.
Okay, so...
Which, by the way, this is actually a sub-theory of SLA theory, so there's actually some people that disagree with this.
Okay.
I am a supporter of the comprehensible input-output theory, but it's a theory.
Okay. It's not proven.
Yes.
Okay.
There's tons and tons of evidence to suggest it.
Okay.
but you know, this is part of. See, it even says it right here. There are many theories about the. Everything I'm telling you in this video today is based off of theory that I learned in school. Most of it is not like 100% proven, so please take it
as a grain of
with a grain of whiskey.
Okay. Yes. Somebody asked, phonetic symbols, is it important to memorize?
Short answer to this is no.
Okay.
The average learner of any foreign language doesn't need to learn those at all. In fact, I would say if you're learning linguistics, it's a pretty fun thing to learn, but you don't even really need to know it even if you're a linguistic learner. I mean, I know it because I learned it in college. Does it help me acquire a language? Maybe. I mean, like, it depends on the language. I would say for a language like English, it can help you, but I would avoid it unless you're really interested in it.
発音よりアクセントの方が大事って本当ですか？
No.
理解した？
Yeah. Like, is it more important to have an accent than to pronounce things well? Absolutely not. You should pronounce things better. Please don't worry about accents. Nobody cares. We just want to be able to understand you. That's
Cool.
it.
Yeah.
Nobody cares at all if you sound American or if you sound British. Nobody cares. Seriously.
Or sounds Japanese?
Like if you have a Japanese accent, I mean, like, but like, what is a Japanese accent at the end of the day? Is it like pronouncing your R's and L's wrong? Like, that's not accent. That's actually like, that's phonetics. Like, that's a phonetic issue, not an accent issue. Okay, maybe that's not true. There are people in linguistics that say that accent is more all-encompassing. In fact, accent is a very stupid word. A lot of people don't tend to use that. A lot of people tend to use the word dialect, okay? Accent is very vague, and it's not a very good word to use because it's hard to qualify. If you become fluent in a language, you will actually naturally start to speak the dialect of whatever region that you're in. And that is the only thing you should be concerned about. You should be concerned about just speaking like the people around you, really, rather than like having a specific accent. Because at the end of the day, you know, speaking like the people around you is what's going to help you sociolinguistically be able to communicate with them better.
Interesting.
When I speak Japanese, I sound Okinawan because I've been living with an Okinawan for so long. And when we move to Okinawa, that will help me because that's a dialect of a language, right? Yeah, what's my answer to this? Stop worrying about accents. Accent as a linguistic term is extremely vague. You should be more focused on just pronouncing things correctly and learning how to actually speak. No one cares what you sound like, really. Like, especially if you're foreign. People just want to be able to understand you.
小学校から習う How are you? と I'm fine, thank you. And you? この会話は本当に使いますか？
Not really. Yeah, not really. I mean, like, God, here's my answer to this question. I probably haven't had that exact conversation in like years.
Oh, so.
Like,
but you have heard it?
Over 10 years. I don't know. Like, I cannot even remember the last time I've had that exact sort of exchange with a person in public. It's so uncommon. Language is not that specific. It just isn't. Language is quite frankly, language is super weird, and it's random as hell. It's very arbitrary and stupid. We try our best in linguistics to make rules for language, but it's really hard, man. Like, language is so arbitrary in so many ways. Like, Japanese is actually, in my opinion, one of the very more systematic languages.
So, can you say, how are you in like 10 different ways?
How are you in 10 different ways?
10 different ways. First, how are you?
How's it going?
How's it going?
What's up? How have you been? What's going on? What's happening? Are you counting?
6.
6? Okay. Did I say how you been? Okay. How's life?
Mm.
You doing all right?
Okay. What's new?
Yeah, what's new?
What's new? How are you feeling?
Yeah, how are you feeling?
How are you feeling?
What's the word?
What's the word って
Yeah, what's the word?
What's the word っていう言葉があるの No way!
Yeah, what's the word? It just means like what's been going on.
That's crazy, I never heard of that. What's the word?
Pretty sure, yeah.
No way, that's crazy.
So, you know, a lot of this just comes from experience. The best way to learn is to immerse yourself in the culture that speaks the language that you want to learn. Make sure that you're speaking it instead of just listening. And, you know, have fun with it.
でした。ジェイコブさんありがとうございました。これで終わりたいと思います。皆さんの質問に答えられたでしょうか。もしよかったなと思ったら LIKE ボタンよろしくお願いします。もうこれですごく LIKE が来るんであればもう一回やりたいと思いますが、少しテクニカルだったんでね、ちょっと I hope you understand everything what we said. Yep.
I don't know. Maybe I sound like a huge asshole. I probably did. I probably sounded like a huge snob this entire video, and I'm sorry. I'm not trying. I'm just trying to answer your questions as best as I can.